Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Golda's Girls, and my name is Carla van Welsum, and my co-host for today is Rachel, and we have a special guest, Howard Rotberg. Welcome, Howard. I'm so happy to see you here today.
Yes, hi. Howard Rotberg is the author of 5 books on ideologies and values, one of which we'll be discussing today, and is entitled Tolerism, the Ideology Revealed. Howard has written over 100 published essays in New English Review, Israel National News, and Israel Pundit. He has also written for the Jewish Voice of New York and the National Telegraph and many other newspapers. He's a retired lawyer and a developer of affordable rental housing for modest income working people. Howard is also president of Canada's sole conservative values and pro-Israel publishing house, Mantua Books. And he lives in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. He has 2 children and 4 grandchildren, and the website for his new book is www.howardrotberg.com. Howard, welcome.
Thank you very much.
We met a number of years ago in Toronto, so it's been a while. And when you gave me your book, Tolerism, which I have here, I noticed the date in the inscription was 2017. So it's been a while, and it's great to see you again. And here it is, and it's a great book. And I started rereading it just now, and it's full of wonderful information. So I highly recommend it. And so I do want to start by saying that when I speak to Americans, and specifically American Jews, they're surprised to hear that there's such a high degree of anti-Semitism in Canada, mainly because the American media just does not report on that. So can you please comment on what kinds of things have been going on in Toronto, Montreal, and other parts of Canada vis-a-vis anti-Jewish sentiment and assaults against Jewish-owned businesses and individuals?
Sure. Look, I think it's the same all over the world. In that October 7th, instead of reaching the haters and showing them how bad it is to hate and to be so obscenely violent, it did the opposite. It removed all their inhibitions, and they used that as a way of going crazy against Jews. And those of us who've been studying anti-Semitism for a long time are not totally surprised, but we are certainly saddened by the extent of the violence, the damages, the outright anti-Semitism. So to answer your question, I'm going to just hit upon a half a dozen or a dozen at the most examples, and then later on we can explore the ideology that encourage this, the tolerance of evil that's involved in my book Tolerism. But for example, right away after October 7th, there was a Jewish-owned grocery store in Toronto in a Jewish district that was firebombed. And they wrote on the outside wall, "Free Palestine." So there was no question about who did that sort of thing. Then Indigo Books is Canada's largest book chain. And in their main store in Toronto, we had the outside window and wall vandalized with red paint, and posters on the window claiming that the Jewish owners of the chain fund genocide. Anyone, I suppose, who helps Israel in any way is, in their view, funding genocide. swastikas were drawn on posters of children who were kidnapped by Hamas and placed in the window as a commemoration for their short lives. And these were ripped down in some cases. In some cases, swastikas were written on them. Roads and bridges were blocked, and we see that the same in America. What was interesting is that a day or two after October 7th, these demonstrations were all organized, ready to go. The signs were all given, so somebody knew what was going on, and they were ready. Yeah. The police, however, weren't ready, and they didn't know what to do. They came and watched these people ruin the flow of traffic. A friend of mine lives around Avenue Road and 401 in central Toronto, which is a very Jewish area. So of course they targeted this area, and you couldn't go over the bridge and get onto the main highway. So it was quite an inconvenience for people. Nobody was hurt or killed, but it was still a very bad thing for these people to be doing. In one case, it was bizarre. We were watching it. Everybody has phones today, so everybody has video cameras today. And at one point, we saw a policeman come over and hand a coffee to a demonstrator, a protester. This became very bizarre. Yeah. He later defended himself by saying, somebody just asked me to give it to somebody on the other side. But the optics were bad, and the optics are always bad for the police when they're standing around doing nothing, as Islamists or those who are from the Islamist Marxist Alliance are screaming for the genocide of Jewish people. And when they don't do anything about it, it's very hard. And I'll talk later, perhaps, but I'm the son of a Holocaust survivor. My father was imprisoned in Auschwitz. Mm-hmm. His parents and then 8-year-old sister were murdered in the gas chambers. And that second generation status informs a lot of my personal ideologies, but I'll come back to that perhaps later. So talking about the question of the horrible protests, and many of them, by the way, are misnamed protests. They really should be called riots. So when people are doing nasty things, it's not a protest. Protest is saying, my opinion, put it on a piece of cardboard. My opinion is that Israel's occupying Palestinian land. Okay, that's your opinion, fine. But when you do nasty things and do damages, that's a riot. It's not a protest. Okay, let me just go to some of the things that are happening at the universities in Canada are the most outrageous.
May I ask you a question about what you just said? What do you think? And I think we have ideas about that. What do you think? Why are they so frantically calling it protest and peaceful protest, even when you see fire? Or why would it not call it a riot? What is your answer?
Because they want to minimize what they're doing.
Yeah.
All right. Make it seem everybody has a right to protest.
Yeah.
But I used to look at the press coverage when the Palestinians were rioting in Gaza, and they were sending balloons with little fires to land on the other side of the wall and burn the fields down.
Yeah.
This was not a protest. This is a dangerous riot.
Violent. Yeah.
And they get away with that kind of positive press coverage, minimization of what they're really doing, because we all, know there's a moral equivalence between the peaceful Jews and they twist everything. Anyway, that was to answer your question?
Yeah, no, because that is, I know they minimalize it, and it's like, but with certain people, not for everybody. Yeah. They don't minimalize Israel's actions. So please continue at the college, yes?
Yes. Okay, so at the University of Toronto, where I graduated with degrees in history and law, they one day they decided to schedule something called Israel Apartheid Week.
Yeah.
Now it's spread all over the world, but University of Toronto, my alma mater, as they say, was the first one in the world, and it spread. And I got very upset because there's no apartheid in Israel like there was in South Africa. I don't think I need to explain why, but you can read all about it to know that there was no apartheid there. And it was, I wrote to the university saying I'm a graduate, and it's really misleading what they're doing. And I got so upset, I didn't know what to do because they were just ignoring me. They weren't answering any of my points. They were just ignoring me. Eventually, what I did, whether it made any difference at all, and probably not, is I wrote to them and I said, if you're going to be this intellectually dishonest and this hateful, then I don't want your diplomas on the wall of my law office or anywhere else. So I am sending them back to you for cancellation. So I was just, the only way I could heap disdain on them.
I get it.
Was doing that. Anyway, the Graduate Student Union at the University of Toronto is very bad, very bad. Now, I notice you have a PhD, so you probably have experience with graduate students, and why some of them are so dysfunctional is something I love to look at psychological explanations for political and cultural things.
I would love to discuss that another time because it is a big topic. Yeah,
there's a lot there that we can chew on. But the Graduate Student Union of University of Toronto, they support BDS, of course. And then one day they said, we oppose the serving of kosher food in the graduate student lounge. Why? Because that would be pro-Israel in their mind. It's bizarre, right? And then in York University, the faculty group said support of Israel constitutes racism, if you can believe that. So racism is bad, so they said racism equals support for Israel. I'm not making this stuff up. I wish
I know. I mean, in 1975 came the resolution with the UN that Zionism is racism, and that started from there to feed the world.
Absolutely right. A law firm in Toronto, a large Jewish law firm, has now commenced a $15 million lawsuit against York University for failure to address recurring anti-Semitism. This is the way that we Jewish lawyers will get back at them. Okay. Well, we don't know where it's going to go. It may be years before it's heard. Hillel, the Jewish student organization, which is still in existence, although most pro-Israel students go to Chabad, which is more conservative, more traditionally Jewish, and Hillel has lost a lot of it, trying to be too much in between here and there. But Hillel did state that there's been 400 anti-Semitic incidents on Ontario campuses just from October 7th.
That's a huge number that's a huge number. That's incredible. Yeah.
Only in Canada. Really. Only in Canada, right?
Only in Canada, you say. Okay. So that, if you like, is sort of a bit of the flavor of what's going on here. That it's unleashed, and we'll get back to it as we talk through some of the other questions that you have. But I think the unleashing of hideous anti-Semitism is spread so far and so wide. And in Canada, we're certainly no better than the United States, and probably, as Rochelle said, probably even worse. And the reasons why it's worse, I'll get to later on when we talk about tolerance and other ideologies and cultural relativism and all of the reasons that we have this problem.
I would like to ask something about apartheid, because that is so much the problem, and that is there is a law. If like South Africa had laws that and reinforced apartheid, and Israel doesn't have such a law at all. There is no law. You are a lawyer, you know better. There is no such a law, and there's even an Arab in the Supreme Court. But the whole world doesn't look at it that way, and so many people believe, oh, it's apartheid. And the apartheid is so often the other side, because if you drive over Judea and Samaria, where Jews originally come from, you see big signs. If you have an Israeli passport, you're not allowed to come in here. And that are the areas where the Palestinian Arabs live. It's like, that's the only apartheid you can see. Jews are not allowed to get in. That's a story we know from the past as well, of course.
Absolutely. The only apartheid, just like the only walls, are there to deal with outright violence and genocide.
Protection of life. Yeah.
Just to keep the Jews safe.
Yeah, I mean, hello. If you see what happened with the Intifada, with the exploding buses and all that, I mean.
Yeah, I was in Israel writing a book during the Second Intifada, and the book is a novel about a professor who's writing a book about Israel during the Second Intifada when his daughter is injured in a terrorist attack at Hebrew University. So this book was written in 2002, and unfortunately, I say it was very prescient, because the professor is completely obsessed with Iran getting nuclear weapons and that there could be a second Holocaust. So talking about the violence, I was there staying at the Meyersdorf faculty residence at the Hebrew University on Mount Scopus, and witnessing the violence firsthand, sadly. My daughter was studying at Israel at the time, but she was not injured. But the idea for the book came from the fact that she called me one day. She said, "I'm okay." And when a child calls you and says they're okay in Israel, that means there's been a terrorist attack that you might hear about, but don't worry, because they're okay. Yeah. So it was a very sad time, and this is what all this violence can lead to, which is to tie together the first question.
Yeah.
Okay. So talking about all that's going on in Canada, the next thing I wanted to talk about is Prime Minister Trudeau, who's had a significant negative impact on the situation regarding protecting Canadian Jews. And his comments have been very anti-Israel, and I think his bias is very obvious. So can you please talk about his role in creating an unsafe environment for Canadian Jews?
Well, he's a younger man, poorly educated, I mean, in these matters. And he's a typical woke progressive. And they seem to feed at the same trough of hatred and moral equivalency, cultural relativism, and empathy for the evil people. And,
right.
Listen, he's had a significant negative impact. His comments, he threatened Israel. Lately, this is in the last week or so, when America is starting to jump on Israel to have a ceasefire, in other words, to give a victory to Hamas, Trudeau jumped in and he said Israel's short-term actions in Gaza could put at risk the long-term safety and even support for a Jewish state into the future, end quote. Now, if you really think about what he's saying, this could hurt support for it. When a prime minister of a country threatens that you could lose support, who's he talking about? He's not talking about Zambia's support or Sudan's support. He's talking about Canadian support.
Sure.
So when I read that, it makes me angry. Okay. Another thing about Trudeau is he's never met an Islamist that he didn't love.
Right. It's true.
Okay. Now, listen, there's a very bad family that was in Canada, and they'd go back and forth between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Canada, called the Kader family. They were serious terrorists. The father was a friend of Osama bin Laden. These were serious terrorists. And one of the younger sons, Omar Kader, was in the process of doing some terrorism, and the military came after him in the States. He shot and killed a young soldier, and he was put in Guantanamo, and he claims to have been tortured, but their veracity and truth-telling is not always the best. But in any event, they were living in Canada, and what did he do? He turned around and sued Canada on the basis that his constitutional rights have been violated somehow in his travels between Canada, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the United States. Our prime minister, without waiting for it to go to trial, made a settlement. The settlement was giving him $10.5 million.
Yeah, I read about that. It's shocking.
Okay. This is so sad, really. That my tax money is going to, and this young guy, like he's rolling in cash now. He dresses so beautifully. His beard is trimmed so nicely. He just looks like a nice boy. And
what a terrible example, too. What a terrible example you set. Because you as a prime minister, I mean, who can endorse that?
Yeah, let me just go on here. In Canada, we have a public broadcasting network called CBC, Canada Broadcasting Corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, because its public sector is filled with progressives, it's anti-Israel and has been for years and years and years. They deny it, but it's just we have an enormous amount of material on the CBC. Their nightly news always portrays Israel in the worst possible light that they can. So this is not so much just about Trudeau, but it's about the entire government and the government-owned media. We all know that the distortions of the media today are completely out of control and are hurting us very badly in terms of Israel Hasbara. To give you an idea of the problem of CBC, a leaked email was sent on October 7th by their Director of Journalistic Standards and Practices to all CBC journalists, urging the journalists at our public broadcaster not to refer to Hamas as terrorists. This is on October 7th. Don't refer to them as terrorists, he said, and instructed the journalists. Very rarely do we get a chance to see this kind of media bias as it's happening. But there was a leak of an email, so we found out about it. And he cautioned reporters to not say that Israel ended its occupation in Gaza in 2005. Because that's what we say, right? We say, look, you want to stay in Gaza? We're not occupying it. Israel pulled out. Okay, they even forced the people living there out. They left you functioning greenhouses, which you destroyed.
80.
Well, they're not interested in those facts. They don't want to hear those facts. That doesn't suit their narrative.
They don't want to hear the facts. Exactly right. So, but the CBC said, don't say that they ended the occupation because there were still some military presence and some control over air, land, and sea and movement in and out of the area, which of course was only in reaction to
safety,
to rockets being fired from there and all this sort of thing. So,
yeah, and what the joke is with this, and that's really a joke to me, that there are still so many people in the world say the Jews control the media. Well, really? We would have.
If we did control the media, the message would be very different.
I wish we did, and that's still people believe that.
Yeah.
it's I mean, without getting into a lot of details, which I don't think we have time for, so I'm going to leave it there to just to give you a flavor of our prime minister and our media. The largest newspaper in Canada is Toronto Star, which is well known as pro-Arab, anti-Israel. There is one newspaper now called National Post, which is fair in its coverage. One is better than none. So it's like in New York where you've got the New York Post versus the New York Times, and so you get, as long as you have a choice of one other. Where I live in Hamilton, it's our newspaper is part of the Torstar network, and we only have one newspaper, so we only get very nasty stuff. And question is, why do I even read it? Well, I read it for the local news.
Yeah. So how is it that the Jews in Canada itself? Because everybody must be upset. What are their responses? What are they doing about it? Are they moving en masse to Israel? What happens?
Well, the question is, what are Canadians doing?
Canadian Jews doing? Because it's definitely unsafe.
Canadian Jews. Okay. There's one of the things I didn't mention about anti-Israel activities, I'm going to mention now. There was a synagogue, a very large Orthodox synagogue in Toronto that had a real estate conference for all kinds of real estate agents and builder contractors from Israel came to this conference to hawk their wares, to say, we're building beautiful condos in Netanya, buy ours. All right. So the protesters, the Marxist Islamist Alliance, heard about this and they said, oh, here they go, selling our land, their occupied land, they're selling it. Well, in fact, what happened, I looked it up, all of the developments they were selling except one were in the pre-67 Israel.
Yeah.
So they were broadcasting, the anti-Israel folks were broadcasting that Israel's selling settlement lands. There was only one builder was building just over the Green Line. Yeah. So there was a huge demonstration outside the synagogue, and people couldn't get in and people couldn't get out because they wanted to take it down, because in their view, they didn't approve of the politics behind the economics of the business deals that were being done there. Anyway, so I think we see horrible misrepresentations. We see horribly worrisome situation. I have 4 grandchildren in Toronto who are identifiably Jewish. My daughter, her husband, and children are all modern Orthodox, which means but thank goodness for baseball caps.
Yeah.
So my grandson can wear a baseball cap. But listen, you worry.
Yeah, that's right.
You worry because there's a lot. If they see somebody they think is Jewish, they will do something. Young guys with side curls and dressed in black have been attacked on the streets.
Yes, yeah.
So we've got a big problem. Maybe we should go to the next question.
Yeah, what I was thinking about was when I was growing up in Toronto, multiculturalism was a big thing. The concept of multiculturalism was promoted in schools, in entertainment, and in the media. And it seems to me that it began to morph into something else that went to the point of what you refer to as tolerism. And I don't know if I'm correct in that assumption, but it seemed to have laid the groundwork for where we are today. So if you could tell us how you came up with the term tolerism.
Yeah.
Sure. It's a big topic, and I'm only too pleased to talk about it because I've done a lot of thinking and writing about it. Look, when I was young, America was viewed as a melting pot, and Canada was viewed as a mosaic. those terms are easy to understand. But Canada, sometime about 15 years ago or 20 years ago, adopted the ideology of multiculturalism. And the US adopted the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay? So the multiculturalism is based on the idea that all cultures are equal. Cultural relativism, if you want to put it that way, is the ideology behind multiculturalism. And the question is, do we think that all cultures are equal? Can one equate Canada with its relatively peaceful nature with the violent anti-gay, anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, anti-Yazidi, anti-woman culture of Islamism? I do use the term Islamism as opposed to Islam to differentiate between those Muslims who can get along peacefully and appropriately in Canada, and those who are Islamists, who are radical members of Islam, who believe in Sharia law, a worldwide caliphate, and the oppression of women and ethnic and religious minorities and gays, etc., etc. So once we started thinking about this, I said to myself, why are we so interested in being tolerant of people who are so intolerant? And that's when I hit upon the great American/European philosopher, Karl Popper. Mm-hmm. Karl Popper wrote about toleration, and he was fairly left-wing until the Second World War, and the Nazis came along and destroyed everything he thought. He said, we can't be tolerant of the intolerant. And one of his most famous dictums or sayings was that if we extend unlimited tolerance to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. We should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. Yeah. So only a philosopher could put it that well. It made a big impression on me, and I began to look at these different concepts that we use, and tolerance. Let me just mention, if I have time, I'll mention how I first really cottoned on to it. My mother had a sister in the town that we lived in, so we had two families that were quite close together. My cousins and I were all very close as a large family, and my aunt had a stroke, and so I gathered my father when he was still alive. We went to visit the aunt who had the stroke, and her one son was there, and her husband was alive. He was there. The one son who was there was a left-wing lawyer with nice little earrings, worked for the government, and which somehow got onto the idea that I thought that tolerance wasn't all what it's cracked up to be. And he said, well, surely it's one of the most important values. And I said, it's not in the Torah. It's not in the Bible. Tolerance is not deemed to be one of the most. Justice is liberty and all kinds of requirements that we have in the Judeo-Christian ethics and in the Jewish Torah. When my father, the Holocaust survivor, when I said to Michael that, my cousin, I said that it's not even one of the important ones. And I said, and my father jumped in and he said, Michael, I want to tell you something Winston Churchill once said. Oh man, I just was so happy. Way to put the guy down, you know. Quote Winston Churchill. Anyway, that cousin of mine never talked since.
Really? Okay. Really? That is so, this is what I cannot understand. If you don't agree, you can learn from each other. Why do you only like the people that are totally in the same train and the same boat? That I don't understand.
Well, he said to his uncle who helped raise him, my father, the Holocaust survivor, he said to him that you should be more tolerant of people who are like Nazis. And my father doesn't have to be more tolerant, and I don't have to be more tolerant either. Oh. So in any event, it began to dawn upon me clearly that we must be very careful with the ideologies we espouse, and we can look for guidance to great philosophers like Karl Popper. But we have a lot of screwed up values, if I can put it that way, in the Western world. We often hear things like we should be empathetic to other people, or we should give respect to other people. And I started to look into all these terms, and Hillary Clinton, who almost became president of the United States, once spoke at one of these lectures she gave for $100,000 a pop. And she spoke about using her feminine skills to create something called smart power, which she said uses every possible tool, leaving no one on the sidelines, showing respect even for your enemies. Respect for one's enemies, she said. Respect, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is defined as a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. Islamism, or radical Islam, seeks a worldwide caliphate achieved by jihad, adherence to Sharia law, trickery, and forced conversion. Islamism being the goal of Iran and its proxies and other terrorist groups who use beheadings, other murders, torture, persecution of ethnic and religious minorities and gays, and their forced genital mutilation of young girls, their abuse of women, and general disregard for individual human rights, does not deserve our admiration and does not show any great qualities or achievements. Therefore, I do not respect my enemies.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. How I phrase it is my personal viewpoint, because I work a lot with respect in itself. For me, it's like violence is not permitted. And what you just summed up there, that's one of the things that surprises me about American feminism. They don't speak up for those women in the cultures of all these Muslim countries where all these atrocities are committed on women. You never hear a word about that. And that is tolerating violence. So it is not only towards Jews, it is in more situations. I come from the Netherlands, from Europe, and I have lived it in Rotterdam from different ways. And, if you have a different opinion too loud, you get also murdered. And it didn't happen too much because people shut down. But they don't even teach the Holocaust in 35 years in the big cities, because out of fear of upheaval of the Muslim students. So succumbing to the fear of what if, respect needs to be mutual. And if our enemy, in this case, cannot be respectful, if Palestinians do not want to respect Israelis, we have a problem. And to only respect one way is signing up for suicide in a way. And I think that conversation is not really held. In several ways, it's not held. And the whole thing with respecting a culture, I like to respect other cultures. I'm raised like that. But violence is the limit.
We must understand that we in Canada know for sure that we're in a culture war. Mm-hmm. America has a slightly different culture war. It's between your Democrats and Republicans, between your MAGA Republicans and your Rhino Republicans. So you got all these different culture wars going on. In Canada, we have some interesting parts of our government that are maybe different than the States. We have our third or fourth largest party, called the New Democratic Party, is a socialist party. So right away, the people who are in that party, people who are in the unions, that's a lot of public sector unions, all support the socialist masters, if I can put it that way. And therefore, right away, we have a little difference between Canada and the United States, because although you have an increasing amount of socialists, even in Congress, such as the Squad, you really don't have as many outright anti-Semitic left-wingers and union bosses. So anyway, I think that one thing I'd like to talk about, if I can, is the culture war and how the Islamists are winning the culture war in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Please do.
I read these articles in the paper, and people don't really get it because there's so many things happening. For example, we have the publics support a secular school system and a Catholic one, and it's a historical anomaly why that happened, but we're sort of stuck with that. So some of us also who have children in private Jewish schools have to pay on top. The Jews don't get the same deal the Catholics got, but so be it. In any event, but there was a story that I saw where their Muslim students are going to the Catholic education system. Why? Because they don't like the weird stuff about transgenderism and other stuff they're being taught in the public system, so they go to the Catholic one. But then they said, as their practice is, they soon wanted to control what's going on. They said, we need to have a prayer room. You know, they could have said, we're sorry, we don't have one, and you go to after school Muslim school, but this is a Catholic system. We don't have our Friday prayers. But of course, they submitted, and they boasted about their virtue, the school board, how virtuous they were to allow this sort of thing to happen. We're also getting public call to prayer, amplified or not amplified. It's a big problem in Europe too, because as Islam spreads around, they want us to be the same as they would have it back in Syria or wherever they're from. And you've got some really interesting questions about should there be a certain decibel level? Should it only be during Ramadan? Should it be all 5 prayer times? In other words, the first one is at dawn. Will it disturb the neighbors? There's and the tendency of Canadians is to virtue signal their tolerance by eventually caving into all of these demands.
Well, if it is only about praying, I can see that from the prayers, if they're beautiful prayers, there can come something positive from that. If that's the only request, freedom of religion, to ask for a space, if that's all, the only thing, it would be different. We wouldn't look at it so badly now.
But it's usually with a loudspeaker, and it affects other people.
Exactly.
And isn't there a noise ordinance or something like that? Because it's not something that, people are doing this in public places, right, Howard?
Let me give you a few more examples, because I think it's in seeing the big picture that will be able to judge any particular one issue. A friend of mine is a great author and television host named Christine Williams, and she is from Trinidad, so she's a mixed race, female, very intelligent, very well spoken, very presentable on TV. And she became appointed to the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. And what happened to her, however, is once she went to Iceland on some kind of visit, and she made a statement to them. They didn't have too much Muslim immigration, but she made a statement about being careful about what might happen when you let them in. Well, she was dropped just like that from the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, and known throughout Canada as an Islamophobe. And it was kind of sad. We have an attempt to have interfaith events, and I noticed that during Ramadan, this is not this year, it was a couple of years ago, the Muslims there invited people to come and share the meal, which is fine. I don't have any problem about it. But the imam went a little overboard when he welcomed people in terms of how tolerant they were, because he wished that they would understand that the Quran is for everyone. And whoa, just a minute here. Are we proselytizing, or are we respecting our differences? And when you actually scratch below the surface there, the answer is not so nice. There was a minister in the United Church, which is now become a left-wing church, although never was in Canada, and he loves all the Arabs and hates Israel and hates the Jews, and has been speaking out against Israel for many years. And what happened during the last Hamas Gaza war, that was 10 years ago, 2014, there was a doctor in my hometown who was actually from Gaza, and his wife was a pharmacist. And she had a job in our town, but he didn't have qualifications for Canada. It takes a while to get qualified. But during the Gaza war, he went back to Gaza in order to keep up his qualifications. He had to work there so many hours to maintain his qualification. So he took his 8-year-old daughter with him. To go to a war zone with an 8-year-old daughter is a little bizarre. But anyway, he took her, and while he was working, he planted her in front of the television so she could watch Hamas TV. Hamas TV is cartoon characters showing genocide against Jews, wearing suicide vests and all that sort of thing. But his wife was demanding that the Canadian government send a plane to bring him home, the 8-year-old home. He wanted to stay, and he wants to stay and have his qualification because if you understand the Hamas ideology, that when Hamas is eventually successful and kills all the Jews and takes back Israel, that he'll be ready to be a doctor.
Yeah.
So it's sad, but the minister who hates Jews and loves the Palestinians led candlelight vigils and all sorts of things to publicize the need for Canada to go above and beyond and bring this girl back. These are all little things, but it begins you begin to understand that we're submitting to some demands that maybe are different than what our historical experience has been. Another thing that happened in the same town where I lived, Brantford, we found out that there was an ex-terrorist named Mahmoud Isa Mohammed living in Brantford. He was a major terrorist with the Palestine Liberation Front, and he had killed somebody in a terrorist attack, and he somehow got into Canada, and then they found out who he really was, and they sought to deport him. Well, one of my classmates from law school, a very anti-authoritarian type of person, she was a lawyer. They managed to appeal his case and delay his case for 25 years.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
25 years. So my hometown, where I was raised, and my mother was raised there, and my father's from Europe, you can see just from one small city that I have some personal knowledge of what's going on. And it's really hard to read in the newspaper unless you really know what's going on. For example, another example is that we have a Jewish film festival every year. All right. Well, what happened is they had a place lined up, but then they insisted on showing a film called Israelism, which is a severely anti-Israel film. And the people in charge of the film festival said, thanks, but no thanks. If that's the condition, we're renting we show all kinds of films, but this one is above and beyond the pale. All right. So they found another old theater that said fine. However, after a few weeks and about a week before the date for the film festival, they said, sorry, we're worried about our safety and security. If we show an Israeli film festival, who knows who's going to come through the door.
Yeah. They don't even think about police or protection. Yeah. Yeah.
And
So it's like a
themselves.
censorship.
You looked at the films themselves; they were beautiful films.
Yeah.
The Israeli film industry is very left wing.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were beautiful stories. Nobody could object to them. They weren't stories about settlers. They were all left wing films. But again, just the fact that it was a Jewish film festival meant that we are banned. And being banned, okay, is a kind of non-violent death.
Yeah.
Okay, my book was banned from Chapters Indigo. Why was it banned? You can read it. Here we go. Okay, that's my new book. It's kind of trying to get free publicity, but not really, because this book has a story of how I ended up getting banned by the same Jewish-owned book chain that has now been seeing what it's like to be on the receiving end of Islamist violence.
Oh, interesting.
When I was on the receiving end of it, they banned my book because an 18-year-old Islamist book clerk made up a lie about something that I said at a lecture I was giving about my novel.
Mm-hmm. So I understand.
It only took one person to get your book banned.
Yeah.
18-year-old. Okay. And we investigated the whole thing, and it's all done in such an underhanded way. I won't go into it, but if you're interested, read the book about it. But I'm sorry, I've been going on so long. I haven't let you ask any questions.
No. It's been very interesting.
What I would like to say to what you just said, that canceling, that all this kind of stuff is the opposite of tolerance. I mean, tolerance.
Exactly. But Carla, the irony of the thing is that when they talk about peace and ceasefire and things like that, it's only a one-way street.
That's true.
Because they're happy about when Iran sent the rockets and the missiles. That they didn't want ceasefire there. They only want ceasefire when it's the other way, when it's Israel.
Yeah.
So ceasefire.
It's a very
when the ceasefire was October 6th. The ceasefire.
Right. Exactly. So
I
wanted to go on with another question. Howard, in your book, you talk about people who call themselves progressive with regard to tolerance. So can you please expand on that? And what extent do you feel that Canadian political correctness has contributed to the current situation? Because I think that Canadians are extremely politically correct and always have been since my recollection when I lived there.
Everything starts with what your values are, and then how those values conduce to your ideology. And then once you have an ideology, what are you going to do in politics to promote your ideology? So it starts with values. All right. And if we don't have any values, we think all cultures are equal, all people are equal, nobody's better than anybody else. That fits into this kind of faux progressivism that we see, because it's not really progressive. Okay, if the leftists were progressive, they would really hate it when Muslims are killing their wives and raping little girls.
I agree with that. It's so double standards, absolutely, and that's the sickness of it. You wrote a novel about the life under the suicide bombings in Israel in 2001 and 2002, and you showed that book already, and it was censored in Canada after the retailer put the book after receiving Islamist complaints. As censorship by the Canadian government played a role in the problems that Jews are facing there today? Yes.
Canadians, I think, virtue signal more than Americans do, although it's getting bad in the States. We view ourselves as kinder, gentler, better Americans. We have relatives in the States, we visit the States, but somehow the States are less tolerant, and they're not as nice as we are, and we give more. We pay higher taxes. We have uniform health. We have health care. So we tend to be rather insufferable when it comes to comparing ourselves to the United States.
Yeah, I noticed that. And that's the start of the problem, right? If you think you're a better person than the other, a better country than the other, that starts to be.
We're not patriotic in that sense, and we have a war within the country. I mean, Quebec, which is a French-speaking nation unto itself, has flirted with the idea of separation, and we had all kinds of problems. We had the suspension of all our civil liberties because of a threatened insurrection in Quebec. We have Alberta out west, which controls all the oil. It doesn't feel that it's ever gotten a fair shake. So aside from the problems with Islamist immigrants, and again, I say Islamist immigrants, not Islamic immigrants. So we think, I think anyway, that patriotism is built on the idea that your country stands for good values, against evil values, and the United States has a great tradition of patriotism, even amongst people who don't agree with each other politically. When it comes to they haven't really attacked their army, for example, in the United States. They still respect the flag, although you're getting, even amongst black NFL football players who are making millions of dollars playing football, they're taking the knee now and disrespecting the flag. So things are changing. But in Canada, I don't think we ever had that kind of patriotism because we don't have these established values, which leave us rather more susceptible to conversion and submission. I mean, ultimately, what this is all about, everything I'm writing about, is the extent to which we are submitting to radical Islamism. And so a lot of what I write about are the various ways in which it's happening, which we don't really understand until it's too late. And really, patriotism, and the other thing that you mentioned was censorship.
Censorship, yeah. Whether it's played by censorship by the Canadian government, whether it's played a role in the problems that the Jews are facing today.
Yeah, you can't if you can't say anything. And they have all these different human rights commissions, and people who say something which years ago would have just been winked at. I mean, now they're liable to lose their jobs. It's like the guy who complained about he talked about the calls to prayer. A guy, he complained about it, and he made some really injudicious comments about what's going to be next, and they're going to be making our women wear big tents, and it was not terrible stuff, but it was not politically correct to say. He was sitting as a member of this local school council. He was also a real estate agent. Well, as soon as he said that statement about if we let them have the public call to prayer, then next they're going to want our women are going to have to dress like their women. They're going to have goats going down the middle of the street. Well, within a day, he was fired from his position on the school council, and even more serious, he was fired from his job at Remax Real Estate. Yeah. So it happens so quickly. There's no attempt. As a lawyer, I always like to see a fair process, due process. Let somebody have a chance before you take away their livelihood. Let them have a chance to defend themselves. Were they misheard? Was it a mistake? Were they really saying something else and they were misheard? Let them have a chance to defend themselves. And as a lawyer, I can tell you, we are a totalitarian nation, Canada, now. We don't have the freedoms that we had before.
Yeah.
And the United States as well. And the justice system in the United States has been, and its enforcement and criminal enforcement in the hands of people who are politicizing everything. And when you politicize everything, then their fundamental values are lost. It's all about power. So everything that we are talking about today is all about power. And the people who claim victimhood, it's because they can't get power in any other way. So they claim victimhood so they can get power over the so-called victimizers. And so therefore the Palestinians are the victims of the awful Israelis.
Yeah.
Because this gives them power. And we see exactly how much power right now as the university students are all falling towards a combination Islamist, Marxist orientation, and are forcing Jewish students to hide from them as they threaten violence from them. So this is all the important sort of concepts that I deal with in my books.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and those students, a lot of them, they align with the victimhood so badly and deeply. There is so much victimhood in general. It's like bizarre. Where's the resilience? Where is the times have not been easier for people in many ways. That's the complaint, and the victimhood is very high. Well, thank you so very much, Howard. It was very interesting. Thank you for spending so much time with us and for being with us. Yeah, and I wish you all the best.
Very much, and I'm so glad to see another website that's worth looking at. And I'm retired from law. I'm retired from real estate now, so I spend my time reading and writing.
Excellent. Well, we thank you very much, and I'm certainly going to buy your book, Tolerism. I have two sons that are interested in that. Maybe they have it already.
And look up my website, howardrotberg.com.
I did already. Yeah, we will put it in the notes.
Oh, and you can. The other thing that we didn't talk about today is how my values and ideologies stem from being the son of a Holocaust survivor, and just why my ideology is different and how I came to realize that over time. And I realized that a lot of the people who were commemorating the Shoah didn't want to talk about some of the very major parts of the whole problem.
I can see that, because that's what I relate to very much too. And that's actually what I wanted to say about today. And we haven't touched upon that. That I think, especially in the Jewish community, that is a little bit more in the left side, right? The idealism or secular, whatever you want to call it. There's like, what happened to us? I see that in the Netherlands too. What happened to us, we should not do to others. And then the blindness becomes then part of the judgment. And how I have seen it in the Netherlands too is that Dutch people in general, they were very shocked about what happened actually after the war more. And a lot of people, they felt guilty, which is, you don't like to feel guilty, so you want to get away with that. But it has created a kind of soul searching and really in society impact. And I think in some European countries, Germany for sure, you could see that they took in 1 million Syrian refugees. Well, for the same token, what do they have to do there? It's such a disconnect in culture and language, etc. Why didn't they go to Saudi or another country, right? But Germany still has that guilt feeling, and you see where it too leads.
That's very true. If I can just mention, in the new book, I have several chapters on Germany, because it's a very interesting case.
And it's Tolerism. I'm going to buy it here. Yeah.
Tolerism, but if you're interested in Germany, and the book Second Generation Radical is 27 chapters that all deal with different aspects of ideology and culture and
it is called Second Generation. What did you say?
Radical. Radical.
Second Radical?
No, Second Generation Radical.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, oh, that is totally. I will buy that for sure. We will talk about it another time. Only about the book. Yeah. Thank you so very much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye
Thank
bye.
you, Howard. Wonderful to see you again.
Wonderful to see you. I'm sorry I got old looking but you didn't get old looking. It must be something about Florida.
I told you he was a terrific guy.